diagram? Yes, it's super simple. Actually, it took me like 10 seconds to do it on ChatGPT. And of course, this is time and this is technology in our lives. And this is the, the growth. And this is where we are today. And you know what that means? That means a very short period of time where the technology in our lives will become immense. And the thing here is that those who will miss that train will join the ones in the bottom. Because as you all know, there's a huge difference in classes already. There are the rich to very rich people, and then we have the poor to very poor people. The middle class is disappearing. And this is something that doesn't leave too much space for wandering, and especially for people like us. Our forum today is titled The Quiet Revolution, and that is for a reason. And you Romanians know better than anybody else what a revolution means. It is painful, but at the same time is redemptive. We lose people, but then we call them heroes, and they are. And their example remains there to inspire the rest of us who got luckier in this process. The scope of this forum is not to scare anybody, but is to ring the bell, to call for immediate preparation so that we can make the best out of everything that is coming. And preparation is everything. And as the wise mother, uneducated mother of a very good friend of mine says to her son, we save when we have. 95% of the people do the opposite. They try to save when they don't have money. So if there is a good time to be a contrarian, it's today. And the things which are coming are only faced in such a way. Our promise is that our club, our community, will always be a beacon of positivity and realistic optimism. We're not here to say that everything will go great and we will all make loads of money, and yeah, maybe we will, maybe we won't, maybe it's a good year, maybe it's a bad year, but we have to remain realistically positive. We are here to learn from each other, contribute to the community, and make the best out of this enormous knowledge and experience you each carry. We are here to lead, because this is what the rest of the world is expecting us to do. It is our duty, it has to remain our pleasure too. So, let the forum begin, the 20th forum of Superbrain, and at that point I would like to invite Sven Smit, who honors us with his presence. Sven leads the global research on economic trends and business growth at McKinsey Institute, helping the world's top companies navigate complexity and shape the future. Sven, the stage is yours. A warm applause, please.
Thank you. So, I'm learning about Romania that this is a quiet revolution. If this is quiet, then I don't know what noisy is. I've not updated my speech to the tweets of the last 10 minutes, but I'm updated till 20 minutes ago. And I don't know what we will get more. I'm looking around the room here, and I will take a bet that none of you has enough gray hair, enough wrinkles in your face, or any other sign of age, that any one of you was in a leadership position the last time something like this happened. That last time was 1972. We all know a leader that was already in position. He just retired, Joe Biden. He was in 1972 already representing Delaware in Congress. I was 6 years old and I was roller skating on the highways of the Netherlands because at that time, basically my parents were not allowed to drive on Sundays because they were basically not to drive to conserve oil. And that's the last time that the world at gigantic scale was short something very important, namely energy. We'll talk about energy later. When we're short stuff, you can have geopolitics. When we're not short stuff, geopolitics is not needed. If every city, every country had enough steel, cobalt, lithium, energy, and keep on going, our fights would be soccer, tennis, or whatever sports you like. But our fights would not be real. The imbalances in stuff and then the imbalances in military power are the source of geopolitics in my mind, not so much the different points of view. You can have different points of view if you're all rich and you all have your stuff. But if one has something and the other not, I might use the other stuff. If you take the conflict in the Middle East, I think it's as much about gas and the Suez Canal than anything else that we read in the press, the religious fights and all that kind of stuff. There's 2 gas pipelines that don't exist at the moment, one from Qatar, Iran through Iraq, through Syria, through Lebanon, through Hezbollah territory, and the other one from Saudi through Jordan, through Israel, through Gaza territory. And Russia doesn't like that gas pipeline, so that's why Russia was active in Syria, and I can keep going. We also have the Suez Canal there. That's why there was a Houthi problem. And we also want a stable regime in Egypt that can help the Suez to be on our side. Now, you might find this all very odd that I talk about this, but this is not what you read in the press. It's a religious fight, it's an ideological fight, it's about ethnicity, it's God knows what. But the reality is, we believe that these fights are much more about military imbalance. And so when you hear Trump talk about Greenland and Canada, that was a little crazy, no? It must have been just a brain fart at breakfast. No, it's not. The rockets come over the Arctic. And if you want to place a golden dome, as he calls it, you have to place it in the north of Greenland and in the north of Canada. And Canada doesn't spend money on defense, nor does Greenland, with 30,000 people, have an adequate level of defense spending. So a lot of this stuff is also about the relative power in military force. And so when we talk about a trade war, I'll come back to that a lot more, it is actually also a reflection of the underlying military imbalance. The military imbalance is that one country is producing 100 times more boats than the other. 80% of the world's drones, and I can keep going. That's an imbalance that is not militarily safe. That's why we're in a fundamental moment, and the last time that happened was sort of in the 70s. I suggest, therefore, that this moment is an era shift, not just for what I just said, but many other reasons. What's an era? An era is something that lasts 20 to 30 years and only shifts every now and then, but then almost everything changes. And let me give you an illustration of that by a history lesson. So this is the history lesson. Since the Second World War, we recognize 3 eras: the post-war boom, the era of contention, and the era of markets. And they are very different. The post-war boom is decolonizing, golden age of engineering, establishment of urban life in the suburbs of the West, the beginning of fall in poverty in all the other countries in the world, energy expansion, petroleum boom, transition from war to peace, all good. Everybody a car, everybody a house in the West, and the first ubiquitous food in the rest of the world. Then you got the era of contention, as we call it, which was the Cold War detente. Actually, some economic powerhouses in Asia start, Japan. Fiat money arises instead of gold. It was consumer electronics. Fertility continues to drop. Health starts to improve in the poorest countries. Severe supply crisis makes me roller skate on the highways of the Netherlands. There was not just crisis in oil, because then if you don't have energy, you have food. Let me just establish this. I will say this about 10 times this speech. Energy makes the world go round. If you get energy wrong, everything is wrong. Then we had stagflation, recession, towering interest rates, and inflation. That's another reminder, because that's where we were not only 2 years ago. So it's also a comparison. And then there's the beautiful era of markets, in which you were learning and leading. We collaborate, supply chain works, global WTO rules, all good. We go connecting digitally. We have a global convergence to urban life. You know, everybody starts to live in cities, even in Africa. We have fossil fuel abundance. We start to worry about climate, and we had cheap money. Anyone wants to vote for that this is just here to stay? At the moment, we're discussing deglobalization, which is complicated, and the geopolitics around it. We discuss automation and AI, which might be a good thing, but we're also concerned about whether it's safe and, you know, will we still have jobs, or are we all unemployed? It's going to be all good, don't worry. We actually are at peak population, the dependency and depopulation that I'll talk more about. And we actually don't have cheap money anymore. And in energy, we are in an all-out energy war. What do I mean with an all-out energy war? The one that will have the most and most affordable energy will be the one that wins AI. The algorithms matter, we'll talk more about that. But without cheap energy, you will not win AI. Without abundance in energy, you will not work in AI. But the other point is, if you want to be rich, you need energy. It's a very simple line. It's like this. More wealth, more energy, or more energy, more wealth. There is no country that is wealthy without energy. And it has to be cheap. And we've been in the wrong debate, and I think it's going to be a big change to the energy discussion, where we just said the only thing we need to do with energy is to replace oil and gas, transition. I actually believe that is wrong. If everybody in the world, which is going to be an objective of my speech, by 2100 should live at the wealth of Switzerland at the minimum, while Switzerland still progresses, which is entirely possible. It would take 3.5% GDP growth till 2100. And then everybody in the world, if it is distributed somewhat evenly, would reach Switzerland. In that world, which is AI and automated, we need 2 to 3 times energy. So the shirt is for more energy. And then in the process of it, we might replace it. But the race is who finds the more energy the first, at scale and affordable, not expensive. If we don't do that, we get situations like this. We're now sort of in 1976. If you see the inflation interest rate waves of the 70s, there was one, we got it. We just got the first one coming out of COVID. But there was a second one. I don't want a second one. I don't think anyone in this room wants a second one. Is there anyone who wants a second wave of inflation? Inflation's not nice, huh? Makes you poorer. The average person in the world got 20% poorer on the back of the first inflation. And only now wages are sort of in line and catching up a little bit. So the second wave of inflation, if you go to Milton Friedman on YouTube, is all monetary. He says all inflation is monetary, all inflation is monetary. That's actually not true. When he retired, people did the work, and inflation is monetary if you don't have supply. If you have supply, you can print all the money in the world, because then you just can buy the additional supply. But if the supply is inelastic, you can't print money. So they printed money without the supply. On the right-hand side, you see the oil price. At the beginning of the oil crisis, we were 50% dependent on OPEC. And it took us until the mid-80s until that dependency was 30%. And what did we do? I'm just going to make the energy announcement of the 80s. It was drill, baby, drill. Alaska, Venezuela, Mexican Gulf, North Sea, Norway, Russia, Nigeria, and a whole lot of oil and gas in Asia. If we don't hear an energy announcement of that size soon, I will bet there's a second wave of inflation. We need to build energy, energy, energy. Build, energy, 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 otherwise we'll be short. And then, you know, it's calmed down when we are at 30%. Now, if you think we don't have 50% dependencies, we did. Russian gas, solar panels from China, semiconductors from Taiwan. They're not 50, they're like 80, 90, and 100%. 40 to 50% of the steel, 90% of the rare earths, 50% of the, and so on. We did globalization good and bad. The good is we went global, which is called Ricardian trade. I'm good at this, you're good at that, we trade, and we basically gain. What doesn't work is to give somebody the keys to your own country by being 80% dependent, because that suggests that you could trust everybody every time. You can't. If you give somebody 80% of your power, at some point they will use it. And it's in that context that we got this slide. Remember it? Yep, anyone? Liberation Day. I think it was deliberately done that you couldn't read the titles that well. You know, the tariffs charged to the United States, and then the USA discounted reciprocal tariff. I mean, big, beautiful discount. How you can pick the words. I was awake at that 10 p.m. when it happened in my country. It was 11 p.m. here, so maybe you weren't awake at that time. And it said 39% for Europe. So I go, wait a minute. Yesterday we did the calculation. The tariff is 2. where does he get the 39? So I emailed the thing to my US team. What the hell is he doing? Well, he's doing trade imbalance. By now we all know the formula. This thing is just a deficit, yeah? And the trade surplus and imbalance. How can he do that? That's not how the economists define tariffs. This is completely crazy. This makes no sense. He's an idiot. Okay. Then we all learned a new word. I hope you all by now know this word. Non-tariff trade barrier. Who's heard the word? Really, only one? Can we try again? Who has heard the word non-tariff trade barrier? I just can't believe it's only 3 people in this room. Okay, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you are just shy, yeah? I believe there's more. What is a non-tariff trade barrier? I'm going to illustrate this to you. So a non-tariff trade barrier is not a tariff, but it's us preventing trade in another way. So Europe has no tariffs. It's 0, yeah? Because that's the single market. Okay. The IMF has done a beautiful report. If you translate the difficulty in trade inside Europe, so this is not with the US, inside Europe, there is a non-tariff trade barrier that you can translate to a tariff economically. Do you know what the number is? 41%. How does that work? Okay, the French basically buy French cars. It's not because they prefer them, but the way they do it is the French car is a bit smaller than the German car, and so when you look at the tax tables are perfect to make the German car expensive. Let me do this from the US. I like cars. So you really think that a European construction worker does not want to drive a F-150 Raptor? It's the most popular pickup truck from Ford in the US. You really think a European construction worker doesn't want to drive that car? Big, gas guzzling, strong, noisy. You know, it takes 2 parking spaces. Apparently that's legal. If your car needs 2, you can be on 2. I didn't know. That's legal in Europe too, so it can drive in Europe. Why is there no Cybertruck in Europe? The Cybertruck is a little shiny, you know. We have to test whether that would be a mirror. There's a sun, you know, it would be very complicated. You know, maybe we get accidents from the mirror effect. And then, you know, it has this sharp leading edge. And, you know, it could cut people, maybe. Okay, it's the safest truck around because there's full self-driving and so on. But, you know, and it's tested in the US a million times. But no, we have to do our own test. You add all of that up, that gets pretty close to the 39 that Trump put in. So at 20%, it's a discount. And so they are working on these tariffs, going after this. So when he says, I love tariffs, they're the most beautiful word in the dictionary, I love them more than my wife. Okay, we'll see how you interpret that, but forget about that. But he loves them. He actually is not an economist. You can choose 3 knives. One is war. He doesn't like that. The second one is WTO talks. You know, diplomats in a back room. Doesn't work. Or you can take a sharp knife where you type in a computer, the tariff is 39, on June 1st or July 9th, boom. And then the pain is distributed. And then people need to come to the table. His philosophy is you need to get the senior people to the table, then we debate. Why he slapped Europe with the 50% tariff on Friday, to which von der Leyen today reacted. Okay, can we pause it till July 9th? But then we will be in the White House. They hadn't come to the White House yet. And for him, it's very simple. You come to the White House, then we have a conversation, then we set the boundaries, and then inside those boundaries, stuff will work. I'm not going to be a Trump apologist, but I want to say one thing. So, you know, in the press or maybe in your own head or something, you can read Orange Man bad and or crazy, total chaos, no plan. I don't want to talk about the first 3, but I will test you on the no plan bit. 400 people worked 2 years. So before you say no plan, you're not a smart negotiator if you not try to understand what the plan might be. You can then still not like it. So I'm going to actually share the plan. So these are important things that they promised to the US citizens. Let's start with immigration. It's the first place where the tariff came in. Basically, it was to bring the illegal immigration to 0. Illegal. Yeah, I don't even understand that illegal immigration is something that you could discuss, but apparently the US allowed more than 10 million illegal immigrants in under Biden. Whatever the reason for that, but he basically said, promised to stop. That's the first time the tariff came in. Canada and Mexico got a fentanyl and immigration tariff. And so these tariffs had nothing to do with trade. It was immigration. And you remember when he said, we're going to build a wall and the Mexicans are going to pay for it? They paid for it in 2018. They paid for it now. Because what they did to prevent the tariff, they put 12,000 soldiers at the southern border of Mexico and at the northern border of Mexico. And nobody's coming to the border. As a result, there is no illegal immigration. It's at zero right now. Then they do deportations. By the way, that's where we get associations with Hitler, because deportation is a very bad word. The deporter-in-chief in the United States is Obama. He deported 3.5 million people, Clinton probably 3, Biden less than 1 million, and Trump will maybe do 2. The exception is Biden, not Trump. So immigration in the mind of the US people, by the way, they will allow and scale illegal immigration, so not illegal. It starts with the gold card, but then they will work their way down. So on immigration, it's check mark. And if you know that this was already closed 6 weeks after he was inaugurated, so in February, early March, you can't get that done without a plan. I can guarantee you, you cannot close a border without a plan and so on. So that's the first. The second was limiting inflation. The first headline was bring the oil price down. That's why the first visit was to Saudi. The oil price is down in 40 of the 52 states. The oil price is below the $3. And the next is very close, and I think they will, by December, all be below that. Now, he claims as a good politician, because of many other reasons that drive the oil price down, but as a good politician, I was aside this trend. This was something I announced, so I take it as my achievement. So this is multiple things that play into this. They're doing deregulation, drill, baby, drill, and all that kind of stuff. And all of that is to limit inflation. And deregulation is also to accelerate growth. And, when I was in Davos earlier in the year, the US executives were on hot cocaine, and the Europeans were on depression drugs, because basically the gap got bigger because of this deregulation. They're also trying to reduce government spending. I can tell you there's a lot of noise on that. I will just want to see when 25 gets recorded, does the percentage of GDP drop? It's actually very, very important, because if the percentage of GDP of the deficit of the United States doesn't drop, the debt of the United States is unsustainable. So a metric is the 10-year yield, which is currently at 4.5. It was at 4.8 when he started. 4.5 is not good enough. It needs to be below 4. And that's a metric that he's not hit yet. I believe a 10% tariff is a given, because the 10% tariff is in the tax bill. And even England, that had a surplus the other way around, is charged a 10% tariff, which is another sign the 10% will stay. But they will work to reducing government spending. I think you'll be surprised in certain places, but we'll see. But that's the jury is out. If you saw the speech of Trump in Saudi, you saw the rotation of the foreign policy to, it's not war and peace, but peace and strength, and peace through strength. I think he's really consistent, and for a long time, that he actually doesn't like the killing. He was against the Iraq war and so on. He doesn't like this idea that the US is about toppling governments, and through that get a division of powers that keeps a hegemony on life. But on the tariffs, he's very consistent. He talked about trade deficits for 40 years. The first time was at Oprah Winfrey and David Letterman, a comedy show. And he said it's just unfair, and this doesn't work. It's not good for the middle class. It's not good for productivity. Actually, there he was a consumer. But you know what it's also not good for? If you have this level of trade imbalance, you cannot produce the drones, you cannot produce the boats, you cannot produce the steel, because it's all made in China. And that is an imbalance that is geopolitically not safe. If a country makes 100 times the boats that you make, like 9 times or 10 times the drones, and I can keep going, that is long-term not survivable. It's not even whether you're a geopower, you're lost. And let me add to that the energy debate. We are currently in an AI war already. 25% of the backbone traffic of telecom is cyber war between countries. I'm in your network, you're in mine. I don't destroy you, you don't destroy me, like the nukes. I know you start to get depressed a little bit. I'm an optimist. I will end as an optimist. I can see it. It's all good. All of this is very solvable. But I do want you to know it. we are in a war. The one who wins the energy race will win the AI race, and who wins the AI race will basically win the war. Quantum is also part of this. Quantum cryptography is part of this. We need to get this right. And a lot of this trade imbalance is also about that. If you can't manufacture the stuff that you need at war, you cannot project the power of war. And if you want to prevent war, you actually need to show that you can fight it. Not if you want to fight it. I think the old establishment in the US was, let's fight a few and then we make money. I think his rule is we are very strong and therefore we don't need to fight, which is a big pivot. And that's why the Syria thing happened, and where he basically says, let the region figure it out and we'll see whether they can do it. And it took a little bit of distance from Netanyahu in that thing too. It's at your peril to assume that they have no plan. You might not like this part of the plan, or you might not like this, but let's take a long-term view for a sec. The fact that the US should produce more what it consumes, and China should consume more what it produces, and Europe should be competitive to connect to that, I think is not so strange. It's not a strange thought. And that the rest of the world connects to that prosperous system, and in that prosperous system finds their own ways to become rich and wealthy, is also not so strange. So the only question is, and I'll come to that, is this the easiest way to get there? Because if you do stuff like this, you know, when the China thing was still very big, that 13.5 there was 47 weighted average trade tariff. And so that was a little dirty. I think it's going to solve roughly in this way. So Europe basically has an imbalance of 110 billion corrected for services. So you buy a bit more defense, you buy a bit more energy, and you settle the score. India has very large tariffs, while US-India tariffs are very low. So it can either go that way or go that way. I'm predicting it's going to go that way. So India might be at low tariffs or no tariffs, with maybe a few exceptions. Japan is actually subsidizing some of its domestic products, while it doesn't subsidize the imported products. They might have to go to subsidizing both, which is a different solution than tariffs. And my colleagues know this. Before the Switzerland meeting, I made the following simulation of what happened with China. The first thing was the fentanyl tariff, so that was a 30% slap on China. And then I basically said, 2 big countries, 2 big men, 2 big tariffs. And the next step is 2 big countries, 2 big men, 2 big step downs. And this movement looks symmetric, but underneath it's 10 and 41 at the moment. Now the Chinese will say 3 years or 5 years of hard work will cover the gap with productivity, and that might be true. But I think each country will have its own settlement in different ways. We already saw the UK. The toolbox that they're using is not just tariffs, they're also doing trade agreements, domestic industrial policy on semiconductors and many other things. So there's a lot of stuff in the toolbox. I'm not going to go through all of it. But it's been a wild ride. China 234, back to 41, everybody else, and the sectors are very different and so on. The most complicated way to look at tariffs, and I really want you to read every cell of this, this is all countries, all sectors, all important countries of the US and all sectors, and actually each cell is quite different. Every sector needs to think differently about this tariff table, and it's being updated every time. And so what could be the tariff scenarios? Baseline was 2. The lower trade tensions could be, so it calms down from now, is 8. Elevated growth trade tensions, in particular with China, maybe with Europe, would be 29. My guess is we'll land at 15. With certain places at 30, but the weighted average will be 15. The 10 is certain, so we can debate. So it's only a question how much north of 10 are we. As the world reorders, it needs to reorder quite a lot. If you take on the left the minerals flows, it's very thin points connecting, with the exception of Australia, which is very dominant. It's actually bigger than I've ever thought. But it's thin points between everything. And if you look on the right-hand side, the chips, Taiwan is very dominant, and China mainland and so on. But basically the chips is a very asymmetric game already. The world could do 2 things. It could go fragmented, where you have a China block and a Western block. That's bad. Then the cost of trade and the cost of goods will go way up, and we'll actually have serious inflation. It can also do what I call diversification, where the flows stay the same size-wise, roughly. They go into more balance, and inside the flows, nothing is bigger than 30% of the buyer. So you're not 50% dependent on gas, 80% of solar panels. No flow is bigger than 30. If we do it the good way, which is a diversified way, and we keep trading, we might keep peace, prosperity, and not be so dependent geopolitically. And let me just expand on that a little bit. At the moment, we might think about who has the short end of the stick. Well, on semiconductors, Taiwan has the long end of the stick, and it's damn close to China. That one, by the way, I know quite well. It's not so easy to conquer Taiwan and keep the semiconductor factory working. It's actually geologically almost impossible. So that's a risk. If you go there, then that stops, which means a big risk for China. So some of you might still want to do it, but just understand it's a big risk if you go into Taiwan, and you could lose the factory by going in. The other side is China is the largest production site of almost everything and processing plant of almost everything, but it does all of it on the back of imports, which makes that there's at least symmetric or maybe even asymmetric, because the imports are easier to stop than the factories. Steel, lithium, cobalt, coal, energy, all going into China. If you take that out, they lose 30% of the economy. And I have this hope that the two big men, when they think about it, they think 30 is a lot. The dependency of Russia when the sanctions was much lower, so they can actually handle the sanctions, while China, I don't think, could handle the challenge. It would be very painful for the West. And a lot of pain on a big action might actually prevent us to do the stupidity. I can't predict what's in the mind of the two big men, but I just have the hope that if they do even the most basic numbers, the trade is actually what makes us collaborate. The trade is actually what makes us collaborate. Okay, so by now you're really thinking I'm a Trump apologist. I think the one worry that I have, the biggest, is this. When you do something big and wild, policy uncertainty spikes, and the policy uncertainty of the terrorists beats everything but the pandemic. It beats the financial crisis, it beats the .com, the Lehman, TARP, the Gulf War, 9/11, everything. So that's big. It's way, way down right now, but I'm just saying, when you have high uncertainty, people get scared. They get confused. Now, it's part of the technique, because if people are confused, they come to the table. If they're not confused, they stay in the WTO room. Yeah? So you have to scare them big. But you get this. Then even the consumer starts to say, oh, shit, what's going on? They're still spending, but they are now at COVID levels of confidence. Not good. In the US was still holding up in confidence while Europe was down already early in the year, and China was down early in the year. And as a result, we have the following strange economic framework, which basically says there are two axes. Normally, you would only discuss the horizontal axis here, which is the balance of the economy to thrive. The balance is, do you produce what you trade and eat and so on? Does that balance? Is there enough household savings? Is the debt management okay relative to the human capital? Are the wages and the profits distributed in a fair way? Is the fiscal situation sustainable? And is the economic resilience and the national security there? Everybody would go to the right. I want more balance. But if you do it in a way like now, the trust could crack. And when trust cracks, you might not have confidence in long-term commitments. You might have higher risk premiums. You lose transparency in the legal frameworks. Like, what does a contract mean if it can be broken next time? And you might lose the free flow of data. You might say McKinsey's going soft because they're talking about something fluffy as trust. If you actually do the economic analysis and you look at a low trust economy versus a high trust economy, the GDP per capita is about 30 to 40% lower in a low trust economy. Because if I can't trust you to be a good counterparty, I'm going to trade less, I'm going to do less. So the ideal outcome is trust restores, because it is lower right now. That's policy uncertainty, that's consumer confidence. But it's also people in these kind of rooms that say, do I like the US? Now, by the way, just to be clear, investment in the US is up, it's down in Europe. Right? So, as always in a crisis, the last resort is still going to the US. So that's confusing in the picture, but I just want to say the commitments that are made to the US, not just commitments, but also physical. Now, economically, I can do the numbers of this. You could have a productivity acceleration that we all like on the back of AI. The US could actually, for once, shine a light to the world, be responsible, do a fiscal reset, so pain for gain. You could also say, well, come on, the uncertainty is gone, no real disruption. You could also have the banks tighten in the wrong way, which they've done before. And you could have the tensions escalate again, whatever they might be, war or trade. The economic range of outcomes is, as a result, very high. The productivity acceleration would, for the world, not produce a dip. Might still have a dip in the US and Europe, but for the world, not produce a dip. We're just going to move straight on to high productivity growth, 3 to 9.9%. The fiscal reset would be a down and then an up to settle roughly at the same level. Now, if you think I'm batshit crazy, I just want to confide that Dr. Doom, Nouriel Roubini, who normally basically starts at minus for everything, said the US was on a path to 4% productivity growth, and the tariff stuff might take 50 basis points off, i.e. 3.5. Don't worry. So he's sort of in the northern side of this thing. The horizontal maybe globally goes down a little bit because of dips in the US and Europe, and then goes horizontal. But if you have central banks tightening in the wrong way or the global tensions escalate, you could get longer global dips that also impede the structural growth. Now, what does this mean? Does McKinsey have no opinion because there's a very wide range? Yes, it's a very wide range. And that's dependent on whether the trust restores and a few other things, and the balance restores. If it restores quickly, and I'll show how that could happen, I'm actually all in for that the higher end of this will happen. And then, you could have the top right corner here, which is high GDP per capita, low income inequality, productivity growth, low interest rates, policy uncertainty way down, trade and fiscal balance way down. Of course, it can get worse. You would find the signpost of all of this in the following way. The new tariff and trade and security arrangements are kind of done by the summer. I don't mean the detail, but they don't need a pause anymore. They're either at 10, 15, 30 by category. And we know what details need to be worked out, and we know what we need to operate in. So then we know trade. We also kind of know whether Ukraine will settle, whether the northern India thing is okay, and whether Gaza, Middle East will settle. Now, that might take a bit longer than the summer, but you get that feeling. You then find that prices don't go up. By the way, anyone wants to venture a guess? If you get 15% tariffs on everything that goes to the US on average, what's the 1-year inflation effect for the United States? He starts with the right number. It's 0.6. 0.4 for 10, 0.6 for 15. It's not inflation, okay? No matter what the newspapers tell you on this. Now, how can you get high inflation if the supply chain breaks? So if China stops shipping semiconductors, it's a problem, like we had in COVID. You don't get high inflation from a little bit of tariffs. Strange, huh? But that's the reality. Then you would find interest rates come down because the deficit is under control and all that kind of stuff. That would be good news. The credit creation and equity flows strengthen. Consumer expectations start to lift because they start to read the news in the right way. And the business fixed investment that's announced, trillions and trillions in the US, are actually in the ground. Now, you can go negative on all this. So what does the market say? The equity markets year to date are up. 1 month are up because post-liberation day boom was quite good. The volatility is way down. The US dollar is a bit down year to date. It's up since the 1 month. I think the US dollar is becoming a carry trade like the yen. And you see the oil price and all that kind of stuff. The markets, I think, have priced in 15%. They might be wrong, but that means they also have priced in trust. I'm now going to go to a few closing remarks, but they will last longer than you think. So this is the CEO agenda, but before I go to CEO agenda, I'm going to go to the human agenda. And this is the only place, you might find this odd, because by now you might still think I'm a pessimist, the only place I'm pessimistic, and I'm a staunch optimist. It's going to be all good. And I don't know whether it's going to be all good on this thing. And for some of you, this might be, you might not like, or you might find it contrarian. When we talk about demographics, Demographics is destiny. Basically, you can calculate from the demographics what the population will be. And if you do that, we got the aging debate upside down, completely wrong, for decades. So what did we say? We're getting older, that's going to be costly. But what did we mean with older? Gray hairs. We went from 74 life expectancy to 84, and before that from 62 to 74. And then we said that would increase the healthcare cost, and the pensions would become unsustainable, and blah, 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 blah. We're getting older. Japan was the example. We're getting older. We're getting older. We're getting older. And that's the problem. That is not a problem. There's not a problem. But let me just first start that getting older is not a problem. The healthcare cost of a human is in the last 2 years. When somebody gets older, it just goes from 74 to 82. With a little bit of nuance. But that's it. The pension stuff, we have baked in pension systems that are unstable because basically if you retire at 57 and you turn 84, it doesn't work. Guess what? We know what the solution to that is. The retirement age will be unfrozen by personal choice. You go earlier, you get less money. You go later, you get more money. And there's no other solution to that. That's called a pension problem. It's a legacy financial problem. It has no cost. It's just, solve it. You really think the 72-year-old would rather die than have a lower pension? No. So they will find their way to do that. So that's not a real problem on that side. Some of you are already getting it. The real problem is fertility. And it is at crisis levels. The average in the Western world, including Korea and Japan, is 1.2 at this moment in time. Korea is 0.9. 0.9 does not work. Just simulate 0.9 for 3 generations. That means that the bottom of the pyramid will be 10% of what the bottom is today. So we all know population pyramids, yeah? That's a growing population which we had in Africa until 10 years ago. Then Africa said, constant number of children. And then the population pyramid fills up to a high tower. And then you get aging. Then you get low fertility. And the base shrinks and the tower falls. If you have a base of 10% with a tower of 80 years above that, maybe they turn all the way to 90 years old or 120 years old with all the improvements. That base can't carry the tower. And let me give you that in a little bit more specifics. Japan next year will be surpassed by Poland in GDP per capita. So all the people who say, oh no, aging, no problem, look at Japan, it's going to be great. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because what happens is, while the worker in Japan is still getting more productive, all that productivity is eaten by them having to care for more people that are older than them. The cost is not the cost of the per person cost that's aged. It's the ratio of the aging people, the older people, to the people that need to produce the goods. And that ratio doesn't work at 1.2. It certainly doesn't work at 0.9. Basically, the productivity gets eaten by the dependency. And that's just economics. I'm not talking morality. I will come to that, the moral case for this. But this is economics. It just doesn't work. Now, and I've only given you mechanics. Yeah, this is reality. We have something that doesn't work. So now, let's get on with it. We'll just fix it. Yeah, and no problem. The problem is the fix is not in. People have tried. So there are 3 things that people say, let's do everything, free healthcare, free social care, maternity leave of 2 years, double maternity leave, parents don't need to work more than 3 days. All of this has been tried in a benign dictatorship called Singapore. And the person who ran that for 15 years is in tears every time he talks about it. He didn't move it 1 inch. So you have all the tools of Singapore. He didn't move it 1 inch. And he's tried everything. Okay, then some other people say, oh, no, migration will solve it. Nope, it doesn't. Because with the exception of South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, everybody else is already short. Pakistan is also not short. So there's a few places where we still get more kids, and it's growing, and it's 2.3. Those are trending down very fast. By 2050, Africa will be below 2.1. But the last cohort in India and in Asia is below 2.1. So if you migrate people from here to America or US, or sorry, Europe, the problem of the pyramid in India gets worse. Yeah, so migration doesn't solve it either. So the third one is the robots will solve it. No, all the productivity growth of the robots are going to be eaten by dependency, while we wanted the robots and all the productivity to make us more wealthy. So even now, I'm not yet depressed. Because I said, okay, I understand we can't fix it, but of course I can. So I'm going to just listen to the people that are deciding not to have children or have fewer. And then I know their reason, and we just flip it around like this. That's where that's where I started to get depressed. Because the rest, until this is mechanical numbers. I'm an engineer, you tune the different parameters, more kids, all good. Yeah, no. The first reason that, so 50% of Western world kids actually consider to not have children at all. At all. Now, if you can't get them, I understand it, but at all. So what do they give as reasons? The first one is, life is not going to be great. Pandemic, war, AI is going to eat my jobs, climate change. Why would I bring children into a world that's not good? I think this is the single biggest mistake of my generation. That we have been somehow allowing the constellation of our culture tell a story of no progress. While I'll come to the optimism, it's going to be very easy to have progress. So we have to kill the story that the world is not going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. Fantastic. But if you don't do that, you already lose a lot. Then they say it's costly. It's actually true. Houses got much more expensive, and the inflation of house prices, healthcare prices, education prices, relative to the income increase, has been bad. So the price of getting into a society is way, way up. So we have to make this more affordable. But we also need to change the mindset. So now I was with a New Yorker who said, I can't have 2 kids because I cannot afford a 3-bedroom apartment. Okay, so I said, what about a bunk bed? I said, until 8 years old, I lived in a bunk bed with my brother, and we didn't die of it. Actually, probably made us better. I have a lot of fun. He's a great friend. And we still recall the jokes that we pulled on each other, like who sleeps on top, who at the bottom, and all kinds of other tricks. And I think that sociological game was actually good. Yeah, but that's not how we do things right now. So there's also a little bit of calibration, but it is expensive. We have to make things cheaper. And this generation needs to start giving the money to the next generation so that if it doesn't become cheaper, they have the money. Do you know what the typical elderly person does? They vote against their children when they go to the vote box. Because they don't vote for way more houses, because then their house becomes less expensive. They don't transfer the money, because the tax on a present is often higher than the tax of an inheritance. So they keep it. And they're also worried about their own future, so they basically say, I need to keep the money. For God knows, I might get very old. So that transfer doesn't work. The third thing is they take the kids later, and as a result, it disturbs their lives more. And so they're hesitant to have that disturbance, and that postpones the decision. And then the fourth thing comes in. They overestimate the ability to get 2 kids from age 35 by a factor 2. So they delay the choice too long, relative to what they want to do themselves. If all kids knew the ratio well, so the factor 2 overestimation, they would estimate it well and take the children consistent with their desire to have children. Do you know how much this would solve? 0.4 of the 1.2. That would be the single biggest step. I believe the first is very important, the positive story to have children. But 0.4 is actually them understanding how much fertility drops by age 35, 36, 37, 38. And then, of course, we don't have a culture in which it was when I was 28. You know, when I was 28, I had my first kid. The question was not if, not when. It was maybe how many, and if it was how many, it was 2 or 3 or 4. At the moment, the first question is if, then when, and then how many, starting with a 1. That's not the right culture. And why I am pessimistic is this set of total problems is, in my view, so big that we will need to have a sort of cultural revolution, which are very hard, to get this fixed. Society will not work if we believe 1.2 is the right answer. Now, there are moral relativists in the 70s that said, you can think everything. They make one big mistake, which might include you shouldn't have children as a society. The moral relativist believes that there is no absolute truth, make one mistake. Evolution does define the absolute mistake, and it's those that don't get children will not be here. So the future of humanity will be those that get children. Mormons, and I can keep going. And that might be the right society, but it doesn't work for many, many societies. So we got to fix fertility. Then I will do one more thing to then lead into my final optimism comment. One of the big things that goes into the bad picture that these young adults or kids have is limits to growth. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but I'm going to say first something else. I want you to learn the word luxury belief. I didn't invent it. There's a book that's written about it. It's one of the best words I've learned in a long, long time. A luxury belief is something you can believe. It might be more costly than your current life, but it makes you feel good. That's fine. You know, that's just a luxury good. But the luxury belief also includes that it then gets worse for other people. So let me give you a good example. Amsterdam, where I live close, has some medieval houses with medieval roofs. So what does the Amsterdam elite do? We're green. We put solar panels on the roof of medieval houses, which is among the highest cost points to produce energy in the entire world. You can do it in the dark in Antarctica, but that's roughly the spectrum. Yeah? You can't make it more expensive. And as a consequence, the price of energy in my country is 3-4 times what it should be, also according to Draghi. And that's true in many places in Europe. As a result, my country, one of the top 10 richest countries in the world, the bottom in my country is food optimizing. They take bad food because they can't pay for energy. That's a luxury belief. You think you can think something up here, and it makes other people much worse. Let me give you another one of these. How many women die per year of indoor air pollution? Per year? 1 million. 1 million. And what do we say with our luxury belief of carbon? You can't go to gas, because that still has 1 carbon. 1 million people. Okay? The world has this thing called a poverty line. In my life, 3 billion people went to less than 700 million. Great news. Everybody above the poverty line. Do you know what the poverty line is? In school, you maybe learned $1 a day. It's now $2.15 a day. Do you know what you have when you're at the poverty line? At the poverty line, you have food most of the time. You do have famine, but you don't die. That's not life. These people are in subsistence every single day. They can't think of anything else than survival. If you want the people to think about society, to participate, to collaborate, they actually need a little bit more. What they kind of need is food, basic, shelter, basic, education, basic, health, basic, and a little bit of a discretionary money. What do I mean a little bit? A manual foot pump for $80 that shifts your half a harvest per year to 3 harvests per year, in which you go from subsistence to be rich enough to send your kids to school. 400 million people live at that level. They can't afford the pump. In the world, 4.8 billion people live below this line of basic health, basic food, basic shelter, basic education, and a bit of discretionary, which is $12 a day. The world needs to get rich first before you can afford luxury beliefs. The world needs to get rich first before it can afford luxury beliefs. When I was young, I couldn't swim in the Rhine because we were poor in the Netherlands then. I actually brought beans to a communal freezer because we didn't have a freezer at home. We were roughly at the GDP per capita of China today. They can actually make the freezers cheaper, so they now have freezers. But we couldn't swim in the Rhine because we couldn't afford to clean it up. Then we got richer and we cleaned it up. You think the people in India put the plastic in the river because they liked that? They have no other choice if they want to survive. 4.8 billion people are at that level. That brings me to your agenda as leaders, and then I will close with the lift of the day, I think, from where we are now. So when I look at CEO agendas, they at one end look at the microscope of today and they look in the telescope of the future. And it was very simple. I speak to 500 CEOs a year, one-on-one or small groups. And basically you have your own agenda. The bank has 5 issues, the beer company has 5 issues, the construction company has 5 issues, the manufacturing company has 5 issues. And then you take one global issue on board. You maybe get your global issue in Davos. It's not a conspiracy there, it's just a chat group. And at the end they summarize Davos in one word. For decades this was climate, circularity, then it became COVID, then it became Ukraine. And then we thought it would be soft landing of the economy. ChatGPT got launched, so it became AI. So we're still with one issue. But 24 and 25 were completely different. The CEOs were working around with a notebook to get all the geopolitical conflicts, to get all the wars, to get all the supply chain crunches, to get interest rate perspectives, inflation perspectives, election perspectives, hybrid work perspectives, AI perspectives, da-da-da-da-da. And in that microscope, you can get tired, because it's a lot. But what you forget when you look in the microscope is that in the telescope, it's all going to be great. And in the all going to be great, hundreds and hundreds of billions, if not trillions, are invested. And let me make you the case for an unbridled, optimistic world. We have enough stuff in the ground to not have geopolitics, to just dig it up, to satisfy 20 billion people at the wealth of Switzerland. We are not short stuff. There are no limits to growth on stuff, none whatsoever. Maybe copper, and even that is not clear. That's the only place where maybe it gets a bit tight. And then we'll find replacements for copper. Enough stuff. And we won't have 20 billion people, just to be clear. Even if we fix fertility, we'll be 12. If we don't, it will be 8 and less, and less, and less, and less. Second, we will have enough productivity. Everybody, humanoid robot. Amazon is installing more robots than it is hiring people. So you not only have your humanoid robot in the factories, there will be robots everywhere. It's going to be great. They will cost not so much, and so they will fly. We will have enough energy. Nuclear, solar in the desert, nuclear fusion, solar nuclear, thorium nuclear. I'm not so keen on wind, but others can think about that. That's still the solution. We'll see what carbon capture and storage does. It might not be 2050, but it will be 2075. If you look at the deregulation of the nuclear business at the moment, it's going to go like crazy for those countries that choose to do that. And then I'll say the last thing, which is science. I believe my 16-year-old daughter has a 80% chance that she will reach the lifespan of humanity, which is 120. And if AI helps us a little bit, she has a 30% chance to make it to 150. And then you might say, who the hell wants to be 150? Well, I'm nearly 60, I want. My hip is not very good, there's many other things in my health that are not good. But if I'm frozen at this health, I take 150 with a bad period of health between 145 and 150 any time. I want to see this future. I want to see my great-great-grandchildren. We need to tell our kids, life is going to be great. It's going to be fantastic, but it's not going to be easy. But because that doesn't make a difference, things that are not easy are the things we remember. You don't remember the sun from your holiday, but the hailstones. But you still remember the great holiday. We need to tell our kids, life's going to be great. So they actually consider that having children is what we do in life. Thank you.